Uh, good evening, everyone, and just please bear with us for a few seconds while we connect to Facebook and everything. So for the eagle-eyed amongst you all, you will notice that I am not Rolly. Rolly is currently up at our Scottish farm at Bellwade Rescue and Rehoming Centre. And so I'm here standing in for him tonight. My name is Alana and I'm Wild Horse Welfare's Research and Education Officer. And I actually usually work with Basil behind the scenes on our webinars. So just a quick welcome again to everyone coming in from Zoom and Facebook. So tonight we're going to be talking about euthanasia and discussing how to know when the time is right to make an end-of-life decision about one of our horses. Euthanasia is an extremely emotive topic, and the decision to say goodbye to one of our horses can be really difficult. In fact, I'm going to go as far as saying it will never and should never be an easy decision to make, but that's why we feel it is such an important topic to talk about again and again. We know that 7 out of 10 owners will be faced with making an end-of-life decision for their horse. And we also know that there are a similar number of deaths among horses aged 7 to 10 as there are aged 26 to 30 years old. So this really is a topic for every horse owner. In 2020, we had a webinar which was planning on equine end of life and how to cope with it. And I'm going to urge anyone to watch this webinar as well, obviously after this one or at some point, and encourage others to do so. Because the more that we can learn as owners, the more prepared we are when we will inevitably have to make one of the hardest decisions we may ever have to make. Ultimately, as a responsible owner, not only do we strive really hard in our daily lives to provide the best possible life to our horses, and we also need to provide them with a respected and dignified death. And when I talk about a good death, it will mean different things to different owners, and that's totally fine, so long as the animal's welfare is prioritised. And today we're really happy to welcome vet Suzanne Green and one of our field officers, Penny Baker, to lead us on the discussion of this topic. As always with our webinars, this is a two-way conversation, so please use the Q&A tab on Zoom or the Facebook's comment to ask questions and share your views. You can add questions at any time throughout the evening, so there's no need to wait until the end of the Q&A session if you have a question. We want people to get involved, so anyone watching on Facebook, please do share the live video. And all our webinars are available on our dedicated YouTube channel after the event. So if you enjoy today's discussion, please attend our others and share them with your friends, encourage them to come along and join. And we always welcome ideas for future webinar topics. So if you can let us know on education@wildhorsewelfare.org, then that will be fully appreciated. Just as a bit of a plug for our next webinar, which is in 3 weeks' time, and that's on the 4th of May, and that's actually taking place during Strangles Awareness Week. So the webinar is called Strangles, How to Confidently Reduce the Risk of this Preventable Disease. And we'll be joined by vet Nick de Boer from Red Wings, as well as strangle expert Andrew Waller on this topic. And I think Basil will be able to place a link up in the chat to allow you to sign up. So I'm going to quickly share my screen with you all. And we're going to do our first poll question. So as before, we always want to hear from you. And there is a poll that is going to go out to our Zoom users. So if you're watching on Facebook, please feel free to add your answer into the comments questions. As always, there is no right or wrong answer, and this is just so we can gauge people's experiences when they're making end-of-life decisions. So the question is, have you ever had to make an end-of-life decision relating to one of your horses? And the answers that we have are yes, it was planned, yes, it was an emergency, yes, both in planned and emergency situations, no, but I have a plan in place for when the time comes, or no, and I haven't actually considered about what options may be best for me and my horse. So while you're doing the poll, I'm going to introduce Suzanne. So not only is Suzanne an extremely experienced equine vet, she is also an extremely qualified vet as well. And not that I'm wanting to gloss over all of her achievements in any way, but when I asked Suzanne before the webinar about what was a quirky fact that she was happy for me to share with everybody, she responded immediately to tell me that she owned a pet turkey called Bernard, and she sent me over this lovely photo that we can see on the side. She also said, "It's not too weird, is it? And so for anyone who watches our webinars regularly, I hope you all realise that nope, nothing is too weird anymore. And I just love this photo, and it shows that it does take a very special type of person to love a turkey as much as Suzanne loves Bernard. So before I properly hand over to Suzanne, let's have a quick look at the poll results. So we can see here from the polls that actually our biggest response of 37% is actually that a lot of people haven't actually considered about what options may be available to them. So I'm really glad that that you're here to listen to this as well. We can also see that quite a fair few people have had unfortunately had to deal with this situation already. And obviously here to carry on learning as well. And as I say, that when we're talking about euthanasia, as with a lot of these topics, we're all in it together to share experiences and to, as I say, to really learn from each other on it. So you're obviously here to listen to Suzanne and not me. So I would like to be able to pass over to Suzanne now to help us lead on this discussion. I'll let you know when you've got your screen shared, Suze.
Yeah, that'd be grand, thanks.
Perfect, that looks great. I will leave you to it, thank you.
Perfect. Right, hi everybody. As Alana said, I'm Suzanne, the crazy turkey vet. So yeah, I'll just quickly go through a few little nuggets of information about euthanasia that will hopefully help you guys make the decision a little bit easier for you. I appreciate it's quite a sensitive topic and one that, although it always grabs a lot of attention, I appreciate that it is quite a sensitive topic for a lot of people. So hopefully this will help ease your mind a little bit. So euthanasia, what is euthanasia actually meaning? And it comes from the Greek terms. And basically what it means is literally it just means good death. So split into two, eu means good and the euthanasia part of it means death. I personally think that in veterinary medicine, we're really privileged to be able to end suffering of animals. I know certainly for anybody who's seen what a lot of humans go through, you know, and we always say we wouldn't put an animal through that. I actually find that a privilege to be able to help both owners and animals with regards to that. As a vet, we have responsibilities to do so in a way that minimises both pain and suffering to the animals that we're euthanizing. And equally as a horse owner as well, I think you guys have got a responsibility to both be able to recognise when that animal needs euthanizing and extra veterinary help, if you like. So other terms for euthanasia: put to sleep, put down, put to death, kill. All of these terms I've heard used. Put out the misery is another big one. Euthanasia doesn't include the slaughter of animals for human consumption, and it doesn't include the killing of animals for sport. We've always got to be pretty careful as vets that when we are euthanizing an animal, that owner understands terms such as put to sleep, because there have been cases in the past where owners think you're putting their animal to sleep temporarily, not permanently. So I always make sure that an owner fully understands what I'm saying if I use the term put to sleep. So why do we choose euthanasia? Obviously, as we've said, it's not an easy decision, but I think the main take-home message for me is that it is absolutely a good welfare option. I think a lot of the problem regarding euthanasia, when you see sort of things on social media where people are rescuing horses on 3 legs from a slaughterhouse or old things with no teeth and things like that, is because people don't accept that euthanasia is a good welfare option. They see it as a failure. So to improve animal welfare and to not necessarily improve euthanasia rates, but improve people's perceptions of euthanasia, the one thing that you need to remember is that it's not a failure. It's actually a really good treatment option. For the horses that are involved with the euthanasia, you've got to remember that although we know that horse can live 30 plus years, if they're living 30 plus miserable years, that isn't a good thing. So their lifespan isn't a measure of their welfare. If you've got a healthy horse for 10 years and then you euthanize it, then that's better than having a miserable horse for 20, 30 years. So just remember that a lifespan isn't a measure of its welfare. So yeah, euthanasia is definitely a protective mechanism against compromised welfare. So reasons for euthanasia: address an issue that a horse is no longer experiencing a good life. And that can be from a number of causes, either old age, the deteriorating, underlying health conditions, things like laminitis if they're not getting any better, or sudden injuries that are now meaning that that horse isn't, it doesn't have a good quality of life anymore. Unmanageable pain, like I've just said, caused by injury, disease, or deformity. Quite often the one that everybody thinks about with that is, your fractured legs or your colic. Quite often, a lot of those diseases will take the decision out of your hands a little bit. And although it doesn't make the decision easier, in some ways it takes the choice away from you a little bit. A lot of the owners that I find that struggle with euthanasia are the ones where they've actually got to make a decision. So your chronically lame horses, or your older horses. Whereas the sudden injuries, I think when that decision's taken out of your hands, it does become that little bit easier. And you've got to remember as well that euthanasia isn't just for old horses. You've got your young horse problems as well, and certainly consider euthanasia as a welfare option for those as well. Other factors that you've got to put into your decision is an owner's circumstances. So you might buy a horse now, think that it's going to live with you until it's 30 years old, and so you can say a nice goodbye and nothing's ever going to change. But then all of a sudden you lose your business, you've no money, you're looking after elderly parents, whatever those circumstances are that mean your circumstances have changed. And it might be that your horse isn't viable to be rehomed, he's on long-term medication, or he's just living out his days with you anyway. And what I would say in those points, absolutely consider euthanasia, because as a welfare vet, quite a lot of the animals I will pick up are horses that people have rehomed with welfare problems already, lameness issues, old horse problems. And so rather than rehoming your old horses with problems, certainly consider euthanasia, because you know that their welfare is taken care of. Similarly, dangerous equines, don't feel that you owe these equines your life, because what you'll tend to find with a lot of these dangerous equines is that they've got underlying health conditions anyway. Short of you having a truly feral or a truly wild horse, what you'll find quite often is that a dangerous equine is one that's already got an underlying condition. So it's already in pain, or it's already got an issue that means that that's its behaviour. So certainly, again, consider euthanasia for those guys. Anything that negatively impacts a horse's welfare in the short term or long term, that can be long-term injuries, long-term diseases such as COPD, laminitis, or again, your short-term injuries that you can't manage because the horse isn't suited to that. For example, if you've got a horse that busts a tendon, needs 6 months, 12 months box rest, if you've got a horse that absolutely will not box rest, and you're going to give it 12 months of misery, then in my opinion, that horse would be better euthanized for its own welfare and its own sanity, and probably your safety as well. So how do you know when it's time? And I think this is the hardest question for a lot of people. Horses should be assessed for quality of life, not, the length of their life. So with disease, consider what sort of disease you've got and the extent of it, how severe it is there a treatment for it, and what's the prognosis if you are going to go down the treatment route? Is it going to return to a life where you can put it in a paddock and it's happy grazing if your horse is happy grazing? Or are you expecting it to return to work and it needs a job? So everybody's perceptions of what they want from their horse are completely different. And there's no right or wrong to that. One person will need a horse that works for them, and another person will happily leave it out to pasture. So you've got to consider your individual circumstances as well as the horse's individual circumstances. And at the bottom there, can you afford the treatment? There's plenty of people that can't afford the treatment but don't want to put the horse to sleep. And that's where you fall into a trap of compromising your horse's welfare. So look at it realistically, without selling a kidney or selling your house. can you afford the treatment? Quality of life, what does that actually even mean? I know we always bat on about it, but what that means is a life that's free from pain and discomfort, and it's enriching and enjoyable for that animal. So in a nutshell, it's a life that's worth living. And just remember that all animals with poor quality of life, not all animals, sorry, are elderly. Things to consider: can your horse get up and down on its own? If it can't, then your horse probably isn't living a very happy life. Horses are flight or fight animals, so if you are having to lift that horse up off the floor every day, that's certainly not going to be an enjoyable experience for that animal. Can they walk, trot and canter in the field pain-free? And that might be that you've got them on some bute just to keep them, you know, your arthritic ponies, that they're pain-free in a field, but can they do that with or without the medication? Can they graze? You know, horses are grazing animals, the browsing animals spend 60 to 80% of their days grazing. If they've got no teeth and you've not got the pasture to accommodate that, then again, they're probably going to be living a pretty miserable life. Look at, can they enjoy half the things they used to do? I find it be quite useful to make a list of all the things your horse enjoyed. Did it enjoy going on a hack? Did it enjoy getting turned out? Does it enjoy its field companions? Things like that. Work out what they used to enjoy and work out how many of those things that they're still doing. And I think quite often by listing these things down, you can work out what you're sometimes missing by looking at them every day. So quality of life endpoints to consider: if they're still losing condition despite you increasing their feed to 3, 4, 5 buckets of feed a day, which is common in owners, then they're probably deteriorating in front of your eyes. And it might be that because you're seeing them every day, you don't actually recognize that. And that's fine, because it's quite hard to be objective about your own horse when they're deteriorating slowly, but just consider that. Recurrence of laminitis obviously can be a really painful condition. And if they're just becoming painful, you know, for 7 days out of 10, then that's probably not a great life for them either. Lameness while you're already treating them on pain relief. Quite often what I'll hear is, when I look at a really lame horse, is people will say to me, well, it's all right because it's on pain relief. Well, if it's still lame while it's already on pain relief, then that's not okay, because it means that your horse is likely still pretty painful. So consider that. Any horse that's not eating, it's dull, it's getting recurrent bouts of colic, or it's getting severe colic. Blindness, fine. There's a lot of horses that will cope pretty well with limited vision, but if you've got to move house, move fields, say goodbye to their field companion that's their eyes, then consider what effect that's going to have on a blind horse, and think about euthanizing, for example, 2 horses together if you've got, you know, if you've got an eye companion for it. And overall, look at, have you got more good days than bad? It might be worth writing on the calendar to see what you think. Are they having a good day, or are they having a bad day? And then just have a look at it, tot it up at the end of the week or at the end of the month, and that might just open your eyes a little bit to what you are actually seeing with your horse. Who makes the decision? Ultimately, it is your guy's decision, the owner of the animal. Your vet should absolutely be there to offer you advice and support. And if you've got a vet that you've had for quite some time, who knows you really well, that's probably a little bit easier than if you've just got a vet that you've only seen once. But lean on your vet. You know, we've been here plenty of times, and hopefully your vet should be able to help you. I think it's really hard to make the decision alone to euthanize an animal. I know I've certainly had it with my dogs, and which I always find quite difficult. And you just need somebody sometimes to tell you that you're doing the right thing. Look at what you've got objectively and tell you and help you that you're making that right decision. Always have a plan in place. I know on that poll a few of you have said you've not got a plan in place, but you absolutely need to make some sort of rough plan. It doesn't need to be set in stone. You can change it, but particularly things like colic, fractured legs, grass sickness, laminitis, work out what you'd be willing to treat and what you wouldn't. Because when you're in that emotionally charged distress stage, it's pretty hard to make that decision, to be honest. So how is euthanasia performed? Here in the UK, we tend to have 3 main methods. The most common one is the injection with a drug we call Somnulose. Free bullet, a lot of vets now don't carry a free bullet. I know I do, but there's not that many vets these days that will carry a free bullet, and also a captive bolt. So, so what is the injection? It's basically an overdose of the anaesthetic. There's 2 drugs within somnolose, one that causes unconsciousness, and that obviously occurs first. And then a few minutes later, the second drug will stop the heart. Each vet is different on how they will perform an injection euthanasia. My preference is that I always sedate them first, partly because I like the horses still when I'm injecting them with the somnolose, and partly because I always think most horses have been sedated a lot in their lifetime, and so it's not that different. And so what I always say to owners is I'll sedate them, say your goodbyes as I sedate them, and then that's the last thing they'll remember, basically. And I think that's quite well thought of, that the last thing that horse remembers is just being sedated. I think the injection is probably the method that is most tolerated by owners, because you've not got the same mess, if you like, and it's not just as sudden as using a free bullet. It's a little bit more fiddly, putting a catheter in and waiting for the horse to go down, because once you've injected them, it can sort of take anything up to a minute before that drug obviously gets around the bloodstream. But it is, quite often when I do a euthanasia, I always think, do you know what, that's actually a really nice way to go. So with regards to the free bullet, we shoot the horses in the forehead. This is really sudden when you compare it to an injection. Pretty much the second I pull that trigger, the horse is dead in front of me on the floor. And I think that's why it's less well tolerated by a lot of owners, because of the sheer suddenness to it. The horses can bleed a lot more with a free bullet, particularly I find if they are on bute and things like that, because it acts as an anticoagulant. But then again, it has its place. If you've got a needle shy horse, then this is absolutely the way to go, because you're giving them that stress-free death that we were talking about. The only problem you've got, like I say, is not many vets have a firearms license now, but most of your Necromen do. So it is an option that's available to you. And that's just an image showing you where we shoot them, just basically in the forehead. Captive bolt, this is rarely ever used. I've got one and I've never used it in 12 years. The idea of a captive bolt is that a bolt comes out of the end of a gun and it stuns them. And following that, you need to put a rod down through the hole, which basically goes to the brainstem, and that's what ultimately kills your animal. I have got a picture of that, so not a live picture, but if you don't want to look at it, just mind the next 2 slides. So that's basically your captive bolt. This big silver bit on the end, that's your bolt that goes into the head, which stuns your animal and renders them essentially unconscious. That's just a diagram with a cow, because it's the only one I had, but just basically shows where the bolt just goes into the brain. And then the piffin, you've got this blue rod at the top left of the picture, which is just basically a rod that you put down to get to the brainstem. Afterwards, what happens to your horse? That depends on you. Again, you can bury them at home. Just make sure that they're far enough away from a water course that you're not going to get yourself in bother. Usually what normally happens is that they do go for cremation, and go for communal cremation at that. Usually costs about £210. If you want your ashes back, which come in a huge casket that you'll probably never be able to lift again, that usually costs in the region of £600 to £800. Another option, if you're near a hunt, is that the hunt will shoot them and will take them away to feed the hounds on. But I appreciate for a lot of people that would be a bit of a grim thought for them. So 5 things your vets want you to know. It's okay to cry. We understand as horse owners, because most of us are, that you've got a great emotional attachment to your horse. And we understand that this is a really difficult situation for you. So it's okay to cry, but don't be offended if we don't cry. Doesn't mean that we don't care. At that moment in time when I'm putting your horse to sleep, the only thing I'm thinking about is how I can make that the most stress-free, pleasant experience as I can for you in a nice, horrible way. And it's often a protective mechanism for us as well, because it's not always easy for us euthanizing horses. Even though you know you're doing the right thing for the horse, it's particularly hard if you've got an owner that, you know, you've known for a long time and you know how much that horse means to you. It's not easy. So don't be offended if we don't cry. Just remember, your horse doesn't know what's happening. Horses learn by experience, and they've never been euthanized before. They don't understand. They don't know what's happening to them. So don't think that they do, because that's you just putting human emotion into them. And remember, when they hit the floor, you've got 500 kilos of animal in most cases that's going to hit the floor. It's not like, you know, they're not just going to lie down for you in most cases. They do fall over quite hard. But just remember, before they hit the floor, they're unconscious. That is why they're hitting the floor, because they are unconscious. So it doesn't matter how they land. They've got absolutely no recollection of that. They don't know anything about it. The other big one, which I always like to tell owners, is that your horse has got absolutely no perception of time. And I think this is really important if you've got a young horse, because owners quite often will say, oh, he's only 4, you know, he should have lived till he's 30. And that, I think, breaks hearts more than anything quite often. But just remember, again, that's you putting, you know, human things onto horses. You know that horse should, all being well, live to 30. Whereas your horse lives in the here and now. He doesn't know he should live till 30. Doesn't know at all. After they've gone down onto the floor, any movement your horse does, they can take big breaths, they can paddle the legs, they can kick them in the air, they can blink their eyes. It's just reflex. It's not that your vet's not put your horse to sleep properly. It is just reflex. And what they can do is they can just sit there and not breathe for a while, and then just to shock you, they'll breathe all of a sudden. So don't be alarmed by it. If possible, plan ahead. Make sure you know what you want to do in a case of emergency, particularly if you're going on holiday. Let the yard know, or whoever's looking after your horse know. I've been to so many emergencies out of hours where colicking horses need put to sleep, and the owner will be in America and nobody can get hold of them. And that is a really difficult situation. Do you send it for surgery? Do you put it to sleep? It's really difficult. So make sure whoever's looking after your horse is well informed. If you're lucky enough to get time to, and it sounds silly saying lucky enough, but if you are lucky enough to have time to plan what sort of euthanasia you want for your horse, don't rush it. And it's not set in stone. You can change your mind of how you want to do it, where you want to do it, sunny day, field, stable. You know, you can have your ideal plan in your head, but basically don't set it in stone if you don't need to. But what you do need to get in your head is, if in your emergency situations, like your colics, your broken legs, what do you want to happen? It can be dangerous. Like I say, horses usually abruptly fall. They can have adverse reactions to whichever method of euthanasia you use. We can put the medicine in, they can rear up and go over backwards. But again, like I say, don't be alarmed. They don't know anything about it. They're completely unconscious before all that happens. So that's kind of a take-home message, really. Don't be alarmed by what happens at that point. Your horse isn't aware at that point of any pain or any discomfort. So please don't worry about what they do at that moment. Don't feel bad for not staying. If you don't want this to be the last memory of your horse, we totally understand that. Quite often we'll need somebody to hold a horse. So if you know you don't want to stay, just let us know, and we can bring a nurse, bring another vet, and we can do it all for you. If you want an owner to a friend, to come and stay, that's fine. We can accommodate whatever you want your needs to be, but please don't feel guilty for not staying. You can say goodbye, and then we'll look after your horse from there on in. It's quite common these days. People want mane, tail, shoes, and you can get some really beautiful jewelry made out of it. And it's a lot cheaper than getting ashes back. So that's often quite a nice thing to do, so that you can, you know, keep that little keepsake of your horse, if you like. And just remember, your horse knows you love them from the way you treated them in life. They don't feel that you've let them down for making the euthanasia decision, which I think is what some people often think. So yeah, these are my take-home messages, really. euthanasia is often the final good thing that you can do for them. It's a selfless act, and it's made because you love them, not because you didn't love them. And so, yeah, my biggest take-home message is just that euthanasia is a good welfare option and a good treatment option. So please don't think that you failed your horse by making that decision. If you need any help regarding the subject, you've got all these links here. Most of the big charities have sites that will help you. British Veterinary Association, Blue Cross, BHS, World Horse Welfare and the Donkey Sanctuary all provide the tools to help you make that decision. So, yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much for that, Suzanne. That was very informative, and I think it was really nice to get some sort of, the key facts and sort of understanding about what actually happens when our animals are put to sleep. You mentioned quality of life a few times, and it got me thinking about that. It's sometimes so hard to be able to assess this objectively. Isn't it? And I kind of always try to think about it in terms of like, is the animal thriving and not just surviving? And just while we're talking as well, you mentioned about having a plan in place, and I just want to take this moment to say that World Horse Welfare, we do have an education initiative called Just In Case that will explain how to create that plan and what things to consider. So Basil will hopefully be putting that in the chat and in the Facebook comments as well. And I'm also quickly going to remind people on Zoom that to upvote any questions that you want answered. So if you go to the Q&A tab and you can mark the question with a thumbs up on there, and we'll go to those questions first when we get onto the audience Q&A session. So that should be good. We have a very international audience for today's one, which is great. So we have people from Scotland, Orkney and Caithness, England, various counties across England, Ireland, the USA and Sweden. And one of the questions I have seen popping up, not that we're jumping straight into the Q&A session, but obviously the term Necroman that you mentioned a few times, Suzanne, isn't necessarily known internationally. Can you just explain a little bit more about what a Necroman is?
So yeah, a Necroman is the term that we use over here for the man that basically comes along and takes away your dead horse and takes him for cremation. Those guys typically will shoot horses as well, so that they can then take them away. And well, all livestock, not just horses, but over here they get given the term Necroman. And
the Necromen are licensed, aren't they? So they've got the relevant qualifications to be able to carry out euthanasia.
Yeah, and they're usually really good guys. We use one around here, and they're really sensitive to it. When that's your job and that's all you do, you understand.
No, yeah, I hear very similar things. And then I'm right in saying that Necromen or licensed collectors, as they're also sometimes known, they can only carry out euthanasia by free bullet or captive bolt. They're not licensed to use injection, are they?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to now welcome one of our field officers on to the panel, and I'm quickly going to just share my screen as well before we get on with the Q&A session. So hopefully you will see that. So very similar to Suzanne's introduction, rather than highlight all of Penny's amazing life achievements, I just want to quickly tell you about one of Penny's hidden talents, which is paper mache and construction. So again, when I asked Penny about her quirky fact, she said that every year in her village they have a scarecrow making competition, and it's taken quite seriously. So the year that they entered it, it was a sports theme, and they made this kind of scarecrow representing Cool Runnings. So unfortunately, this scarecrow would only be up for a few days before Penny came home to discover it had actually been collected by the bin men and taken away as some rubbish bags had been placed near it. And I'm just going to show you now the scarecrow, because I think it was very unfair of the bin men to have removed that, thinking that was rubbish. So no, Penny, do not take to heart that the bin men took away your hard efforts. But you did tell me, so you got 5 minutes of fame as you kind of got some local press about it, and even the Sun, was that right? The Sun contacted you.
Yeah, it went in the local paper, and then I drew the line, and the Sun rang and thought, no, I'm sure there are better things to report than the loss of our scare.
That's just a little bit of light entertainment for while we are in obviously a very emotive and sort of serious subject. So I'm just going to ask Basil to stop sharing that screen for me. Thank you. And we're just going to, we've got some questions that prepared beforehand just to kind of sort of, as I say, get the ball rolling with this panel. So thank you again, Penny, as well, for joining us on this. And yeah, Suzanne, so I'm going to actually ask you both to consider this first question for me. So at Wild Horse Welfare, we are often needed to support owners who are like struggling to make these end of life decisions that we've, and at times, unfortunately, this decision should ideally maybe be made a number of weeks or sometimes even months earlier. But where can owners go to for support, either physical support or emotionally, if they're considering euthanizing their horse, but they're unsure if they're making the right decision? So I'll start with you, Penny. Is that okay?
Yeah. I think it's really telling in this country nowadays that we actually have quite a number of different organisations that provide support for the public in this area. And I think it's really reflective of the fact that, you know, it's really recognised now that we suffer from grief when we lose an animal. So there's a few different places that people can go. The Blue Cross actually have a pet bereavement service. So it's not, you know, it doesn't have to be specifically horses, but for any pet bereavement, they have suitably qualified and trained people to be able to offer support to people who've lost an animal. The British Horse Society run a fantastic service called FATE. It's Friends at the End is its full title. And they have volunteers, a network of volunteers who can either offer support on the phone or they can actually offer physical support. And I know a number of people have really benefited from their FATE service. So their service can literally, you know, be right from one end of the scale to the other. So it can just be a person on the end of the phone wanting some emotional support, right through to having one of their volunteers there to assist you on the day when your horse is being put to sleep. So their service is really varied. Where else can they go? So VHS, Friends at the End, and probably the Blue Cross one is the ones that sort of jump to the forefront of my mind. Equally, I know that our UK Welfare Office quite often has calls from people wanting to discuss, you know, their own horse and their own horse's situation. And I know when I've spoken to the ladies in the office before, they've quite often described to us, you know, we're out in the field on the front lines. We don't always get that sort of initial member of public conversation, but they've always sort of said to us that it's almost like sometimes people ring in and it's a bit like they want to discuss their situation with their horse with somebody who doesn't know them or somebody who doesn't know their situation. And it's almost like they're asking for permission. They want to discuss it with that person on the end of the phone. And they almost want sort of permission to sort of, you know, make that decision. And so having that person there to be able to discuss it with, I think is really, really crucial.
No, I totally understand that. And I think it must be sort of just as hard for, I suppose, with you in your job as well, like sometimes potentially feeling a little bit like you're going around a bit like the Grim Reaper sort of giving people the sort of that kind of I don't know, maybe not necessarily, no, that kind of that good advice that they need, but also again must take its toll on sort of on those on the welfare situation as well, at the sort of the pointy end of it all.
Yeah, I think, you know, I mean, there's another service actually that I've just remembered, that equine end of life service. So, you know, what we forget that when we've got to make these arrangements, sometimes just making the arrangements themselves can be quite, you know, taxing for people. So that equine end of life service is somewhere where you can go pick up the phone once, speak to somebody on the end of the phone, and then they will go and make all of those arrangements for you if that's what you want them to do, so that you don't have to ring around getting prices for different parts of the you know, the process that you've now got to make arrangements for. So I think, you know, every part of euthanasia is difficult for people, but I think the difficulties that we face with that is really reflected in the services that are now offered. There really are some amazing services out there, and it's just about getting that message across to people that, you know, that these services are here. They are here to help you.
Great. And Suzanne, is there anything else that you'd like to add on to that?
Well, yeah, they're the obvious ones, but again, speak to your vet, because quite often if you just need some medical advice or an objective opinion of how your horse is doing, then particularly if they've known your horse for a long time, then they're quite often well placed to advise you and guide you as you need. And again, your family, your friends, people who know your horse, but aren't just as emotionally involved as you are, can quite often give you that objective perspective on it, which is actually what you need at that point.
Totally, yeah. And no, thank you. And Penny, this one I was going to aim at you just because I know we have actually discussed it a little bit more, but sometimes actually these situations can be made even more challenging when there's children involved, particularly in the care of that horse or if it's that child's horse. And so do you have any advice on how parents or the responsible adult might be able to manage this type of situation?
I think this is always a tricky one, isn't it? Because, well, firstly, no one wants to be told how to parent, but I think I would probably say there's one thing to remember with this, and that when there's a child involved, this is, be it horse, be it pet dog, whatever the animal is, that is most likely to be that child's first experience of a loss. And the way that experience happens for that child can quite often set them up for how they will deal with bigger losses that they will face, throughout their lives. And so I think it's really important that they have, I'm not going to apologise for using the term a good experience, because it is important that they have a good experience when it comes to losing an animal, so that they understand, what having an animal means, and that is part of that responsibility. And, I'll share the experience that I had with my daughter, who, when we had to have her pony put to sleep when I think she was like 6 at the time, maybe 7. And somebody had said to me, "Oh, are you going to tell her that the pony's gone to a farm?" And I thought, what do you mean? Why would I do that? And I was pretty horrified at that thought, because I thought it didn't even dawn on me not to tell her that actually, the pony's gonna have to be put to sleep, because I think the thought of her thinking that the pony had just gone somewhere else would be far, far worse in my eyes as a parent than telling her that, it had to be put to sleep. So I did, gave her that opportunity to say goodbye, and she dealt with it incredibly well. And of course she was upset. I think you have to expect that they're going to be upset. But then when we lost our dog, a year later, she was just a bit more prepared. So I think, no one's, like I say, no one wants to tell the parent what they should do, how they should do it. But I do think it's important to just remember that the experience that you give a child with the loss of an animal is going to prepare them for the other losses that they will have in life. So for me personally, allowing them an opportunity to say goodbye and to understand what, death means and how it happens. Obviously there's going to be an element of, depending on the age of the child, you're not going to let them be there likely, when it happens, but giving them that opportunity to say goodbye, I think is really, really important. At least it was for me.
Yeah, no, thank you, Penny. I think we try to protect our children from absolutely everything, don't we? But actually, as you described it, giving them the experience of that, of a good death does actually, as you say, kind of set the scene for hopefully how they'll manage situations as they grow up. Suzanne, I've got a question here for you about, so if an owner is faced with a situation that there may be a treatment for their horse that means it could actually make quite a reasonable recovery, is the owner still okay to decide that euthanasia might actually still be the best option for them or their horse? And will their vet support this?
Yeah, absolutely. If somebody came to me with that issue, then yeah, absolutely. If you don't want to do a treatment plan, don't think the treatment plan is, do you know what I mean, a road you want to go down for your horse for whatever reason, like they won't box rest, it's too much time, they won't make a good enough recovery that they won't go back to eventing, which is what you want to do, or whether you just don't want to do it, you're emotionally tired of, you could have been with a chronic laminitic for years and some great new treatment plans come out which will make them that little bit more comfortable, but you've been down this road now for God knows how long and you're emotionally drained of it, then yeah, because that decision has got to be right for both of you. So yeah, absolutely. Just because there is a treatment doesn't mean to say that you have to take it, because euthanasia is a treatment in itself. So yeah, absolutely. And your vet will, or should support that. Yeah.
No, and I think there's often lots of reasons why owners may decide that it isn't the right option, and as you say, it's you mentioned it a few times in your presentation that euthanasia is always a sort of a welfare positive option as well, isn't it? It is always a treatment option. And I've got a question here that I know you did touch again on, or you didn't touch again, you explained in your presentation, but should the owner always be the one to hold their horse when the time comes, or is it actually okay to ask someone else to do it?
Absolutely personal preference. As a vet, I don't have any preference either way. Like I say, I've been to yards where the owner has, people I've known where they don't want to be there. like, that's the horse, they'll go out for the day, I'll have taken the nurse and I will sort everything out for them, from putting the horse to sleep and waiting for the necroman to come and collect the horse for them, and we'll have all that planned before I get there. But equally, we get there sometimes and an owner thinks that they can hold a horse, and then at the last minute they decide they can't, in which case what I might do is just get them to hold it while I sedate it, and then I'll manage everything else myself, or they'll get a friend to hold it. So no, don't feel that you have to hold that horse at all. It's personal preference.
And as you're saying, if you're sedating as well, then that provides a sort of an option for you to be able to undertake the actual euthanasia element sort of on your own, doesn't it? Or with sort of...
Yeah, absolutely.
Penny, do you have any advice about how we can best prepare if we've got any companion horses for the loss of their friend, and how can they best manage that horse that's going to be sort of potentially left alone when the day comes?
Yeah, I think it's always difficult, isn't it? And I've sort of experienced all sorts of different options with this, you know, from everything from planning to, you know, preparing to get another companion before that incident happens. And if you're planning ahead, then that can be something that you can factor in. Certainly, it's not uncommon that people will come to us to rehome a companion horse if they know that the other companion is going to be leaving them, all the way through to even when, you know, decisions have been made to let two horses go together, even if there's not a medical reason for the other one to go, because it can be considered, you know, a lot kinder than to put it through what will potentially be, you know, a stressful period afterwards. So I think, you know, and the person that's going to know that horse best is the owner, isn't it? The person that knows how that horse is going to react is definitely the owner. We certainly don't advocate having horses put to sleep in front of other horses, but we do advocate allowing their companions to say goodbye to the body. And from my experience, I honestly can't think of a bad experience from that scenario. It's always, you know, they just know, they just seem to know, and they seem to accept it really, really well. So yeah, I think it's just a case of putting that thought into it, and really that comes in again to what Suzanne was saying about planning. If you've got another horse and you've got well, really, whether it's an older horse or not an older horse, you know, put that forethought into what's going to happen should one of the horses go and be left on its own. What will you do with that?
No. And Suzanne, is that going to be the same if we've got donkeys? I know donkeys obviously can be a bit more pair bonded, can't they? And would we want to be any other considerations if it was donkeys?
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up donkeys actually. But yeah, certainly if you've got donkeys, then if you are able to plan a euthanasia, then absolutely plan it, because people always say they die of a broken heart. What they actually die of is hyperlipemia, where they stop eating and then use their own fat in it. It breaks the liver basically, but we'll go with they die of a broken heart. Anyway, so if you've got a donkey and its donkey friend suddenly dies and it's pair bonded, then leave the dead donkey with the live donkey for 1 or 2 days to let them come to terms, because they really do grieve. If you've got time to plan a euthanasia with a donkey, try and introduce another donkey into a group so that it at least has another friend there, and do that, you know, over a number of weeks to months if you can, if you know that's what's coming up. But yeah, certainly donkeys are a little bit more quite a lot more difficult to manage than horses, really.
You know, and Basil, I think there might be a link to the Donkey Sanctuary page on euthanasia, if you're able to put that into the chat as well. Just they're obviously have a bit more information as well. Okay, we're going to move on to the audience Q&A session now, and we've already got quite a lot of questions coming in. So if anyone has got any more questions, then please, as I say, put them in the Q&A tab on Zoom, or if you're on Facebook, on to the comments section, and upvote any questions that you really want answered. We also do accept questions to come in via email, and we have had one that came in before today's session with the person wanting to be kept anonymous, so that's totally fine. So I'll just read out the question, and I'll aim this one at you, Suzanne, if that's okay. So the question is, I have a 12-year-old Highland pony who has a DDFT tear. He's been out of work for over a year whilst we've worked with the vet and farrier to try and get him sound. Sadly, we've not managed this, and he's still lame most of the time, although not so much in walk. The vet feels he's not too uncomfortable, and we've agreed that he needs to be retired. However, as a Highland as he's a Highland, his weight will become an issue if he's turned out 24/7, and I don't have the option to strip raise, etc. Both the vet and farrier have agreed ongoing management will be difficult, and have suggested that having him put to sleep may be the best option. And there lies my problem. How on earth do I make that decision, and when? So obviously, this is a really tough situation that this owner is in.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think these are the owners that I was saying, I think, struggle with the decision more, because you've got a decision to make almost, that, you know, you think the horse could manage out, but then you've got another problem that's working against you. And quite often you will find that you can have, for example, a laminitic horse that, you know, doesn't want to be going out eating lots of grass, and might spend quite a bit of time stable, but then it might also have RAO, COPD, whatever you want to call it, equine asthma, which requires it to be out all the time. So when you've got two problems that are working against each other, a little bit like you with a DDFT tear where your horse is still lame, and a Highland which will get fat on green concrete. So you've got two problems opposing each other, and if you don't have a management system, you know, it'd be all great if you lived in a world where you've got an endless pot of money, you could buy premises with, you know, a nice little paddock for it of chippings, and it doesn't have to eat grass, and it can stand there and live happily, cheaply for the rest of its life. Then that's great, but most people don't have the luxury of that option. So for me, if what you're saying is that you've not got the ability to cope with what that horse needs, because he's going to get fat if he goes out, which is then going to make your lameness problem worse as well, then yeah, I do think euthanasia would be a really good option for him.
No, thank you. And I know that it's sort of on paper that these decisions might seem, you know, obviously they seem a bit more sort of black and white, and but understanding obviously how difficult it is to keep the weight control of horses under control somewhat, and then obviously the other implications, health implications that being overweight can have. As I say, it's sort of trying to balance sort of lots of concerning issues, isn't it?
Yeah, and equally, even if you could put him out on chipping and he's not grazing, how happy is he actually going to be? Is that adding, you know, taking away from his quality of life as well?
I think exactly, when you go back to thinking about what is quality of life, and are they thriving in that environment, or just merely surviving, and it's trying to, and I think is your key point as well, that horses, you know, they live in the moment, don't they? They don't have that sort of understanding of time or the future.
And all they want to do is eat and play with their friends, and if he can't do either, then it's not a great position for him.
No, okay. We have another question here from Alex, and I'm going to aim it at this one at you again, Sue. So with an elderly horse at 32 with arthritis, how long can you give bute to manage the pain?
As long as you need to. Your main problems with bute is obviously kidney damage, gastric ulceration, or colitis. If they're on a sort of normal dose of bute without it being too excessive, you probably won't get colitis in a hurry. Kidney damage, well, if your horse gets kidney damage, or then that sort of answers your own question, because if you can't take him off the bute because he's too lame and he gets kidney damage from it, then you've still reached the same endpoint. But yeah, we've got plenty of old horses on bute long term, and if they get to a point where they can't have the bute and then their pain for their other condition isn't manageable, then you still reach the same euthanasia decision. So I wouldn't worry about what time frame you've got them on at 32, because all you're doing is keeping him comfortable, a little bit like old grandmas on ibuprofen every day. Do you know what I mean? You don't take them off it, and you just keep them comfortable for as long as possible, basically, because that's what you're doing, isn't it?
No, thank you. And Penny, we got in here, and you've actually touched upon this before, but the question again is from Alex to say, is it a good idea to let field companions be with the horse as they are euthanized, or let them see the horse after it's gone?
I mean, my personal experience is, you know, we try to avoid the physical act of putting a horse to sleep in front of another horse for a number of reasons, but we absolutely, if they're a companion, let that companion see the body of the horse afterwards. And like I said, I can't honestly ever think of one adverse reaction to that. It's always been a good reaction in terms of that horse accepting it. You know, the thought of whilst we don't want to humanise horses, if the horse that's being put to sleep is just simply disappears, that horse doesn't know where it's gone and will, quite naturally call out for that horse, just as it would as if you walked it out the field. So our experience, certainly my experience, is letting them see the horse that's been put to sleep, is a good thing.
Yeah, and I've also heard, again, sorry, without the sort of the science behind it, so please correct me wrong, but it kind of provides that bit of sort of closure to them as well, that they understand that that horse isn't coming back if they've seen it, versus thinking it's gone out and, as you say, carry on calling. And we've seen it in other species as well. Things like elephants sort of mourn the loss of their dead family members and things, and again, it allows them to move on.
I'm always cautious of over-humanising things, but there is definitely something there that makes them accept that their companion is gone, which has got to be, hasn't it? It's got to be far more preferable for that way than the horse going, "Where's my companion? You've just walked it out the field and now I don't know where it is." So there's definitely some level of understanding there from my experience.
Yeah, no, and I think just sort of very briefly from my own experience of having my own horse put to sleep and keeping his companion, who would always be a bit stressy when he was like left on his own if I went out for a hack or took him out, versus then him obviously being aware that the horse was gone, and he was quite subdued, I'd say, for a couple of days, but he ate and just sort of moseyed around, and we've got some alpacas here, so he then went and sort of just hooked up with the alpacas, but there was none of his normal sort of calling or anything like that. He did know that he was, it felt like, as I say, without trying to anthropomorphize it, that he was aware that
Yeah, I think that's quite a common experience. We've had that sort of fed back to us, that actually, if we'd have taken the companion away under normal circumstances and walked the companion out the field, that the other horse would have, really got really distressed and stressed and calling out and pacing up and down. But actually, after the companion's been put to sleep, you like you say, you can have those several days of quietness, sometimes even longer. And I think that can be quite difficult for owners to deal with, because it feels like there are the horses almost grieving as well. So. But that seems to be a sort of a fairly natural process for that horse to go through, and just ensuring that, even worst case scenario, even if they don't have any other equine companionship, as you just said, any other animal companionship is really, would be the ideal way to go, even if it's not equine.
Yeah, and I'm going to put this next question back to you again, Penny. And it's from Angela, and it says, "I'm terrified that as and when the time comes, I won't be strong enough and will likely be a wreck. My horse will surely know something is wrong with me being like this, won't she? Therefore, as much as I'd be there for her, but if I'm so distressed, is it best for my horse if I'm not there? I beat myself up if I'm not there for her, though, but if my distress was felt by her." So she's obviously doesn't know whether her stress will be creating a sort of more difficult environment for the horse. Do you have any advice?
There's a little section in there that I just think, as horse owners, we're all really guilty of, and that is, putting ourselves under this enormous amount of pressure when it comes to euthanasia, because we all feel this sense of, I've got to be there, and if I'm not there, it's it's considered that you failed your horse. I don't know where that came from. I don't know if it's just something that we as humans naturally do, but I really want to dispel that myth, because I think we're, when you're losing a horse anyway, you're going through a grief process. So to then even possibly put yourself under more pressure to be there, if you think you can't handle it, is just the worst thing that you could do from your own point of view. And whilst there's an element of, we obviously want to protect the horse, I think we have to look after ourselves as well. So if you really think that you can't be there, the horse won't know. He really won't know. You can still say your, comfortable goodbyes, but equally, maybe having someone else there with you, who, if at that last minute you feel, no, I really can't do it, perhaps you've got sort of almost a stand-in, A, to help with it, and B, just to sort of soothe the horse. That's probably a good way to do it. So if you think, I'm going to try and do it, and if at the last minute you get there and you think, no, I can't do it, you've got a backup friend, somebody that can be there for you to sort of step into that breach. But I would honestly stress that I just don't think we should put ourselves under that amount of pressure, because the only person that's putting ourselves under that pressure is ourselves. There's no one, there shouldn't be anybody else, that's going to say to you, you're a terrible person because you weren't there when your horse was put to sleep. I think that just has to be, as human beings, we have to eradicate that. It's not a fair thing for people to feel or think in today's world.
And I 100% agree with you. And I think Angela, the fact that she recognises, like, before the event that she might not actually be able to be in like the sort of the, you know, the best possible sort of, you know, mental state is actually a really good thing for her to have identified. So it means that, as Suzanne mentioned before, about having your sort of your friends around you at that time, so you can actually lean on them a little bit for support, and maybe that is to hold the horse, or kind of direct the vet. So it is, I think, being able to identify that in yourself is a really positive step, rather than sort of only finding out on the day that you're not ready and then trying to sort of scramble around to find somebody that might be able to help. So
yeah, and I'll share this with was it Angela? I'll share this.
Angela, yeah.
You know, I've seen, like Suzanne, you know, huge numbers of horses put to sleep. I've had to do it in my day when I was RSPCA inspector. You know, I've had huge number of presents there when that has happened. When my daughter's pony was put to sleep, I had no idea this was going to happen, but right at the last minute, I couldn't hold her. I couldn't hold her. My knacker man was absolutely amazing. He was somebody I knew through work. He didn't, you know, he always did such a good job, and he just completely got it, took the lead right from me, and that was that, and I had to walk away. So, you know, like Suzanne said right at the beginning, we're all human. You know, it doesn't matter what background you're from, we're all human at the end of the day, and there's no shame in that.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. Suzanne, there's one here from you from Hannah, and it's like, is there a certain amount of lameness that is acceptable for a retired horse in a field?
Oh, well, that's a question, isn't it? Depends what's causing the lameness, how many legs it's lame on, and things like that. Are you giving it bute? For me, horses that are sort of 3/10 and above lame on multiple limbs that aren't responsive to bute aren't pasture sound. So it depends on multiple things really, but it's not as simple as saying if your horse is 3/10 lame versus 4/10 lame, then one should live and one shouldn't live. It depends on, do you know what I mean? So many different things, really.
Yeah, and I suppose it's how, as you say, there's so many different factors that plays into it, and how it's coping with the environment, and is there any other ailments going on as well, and what its behaviour is like. Okay, and while you're here, Suzanne, we'll just go to are there any objective ways in which you can assess quality of life?
Again, a bit like I said in my talk, I think one of the good ways is to write down a list of, you know, like say 10 things that your horse enjoys doing when it was healthy, and then write down how many of those things that your horse can still do now. And if you're finding that that list is half swayed into what they can't do, rather than it can do more than half of those things that it used to enjoy, then that's probably not quality of life for it. Like, it's fine if they've just, you know, slowed down and they can't do it as quick or as often as they used to. But if they're not doing it at all, you know, and they're dull, they're anorexic, they can't eat the grass the same, they don't want to play the same, you know, you can't take them out on a hack, and that's what they used to enjoy. All these things for them amount to their quality of life. You know, as his friend died and he's the last known survivor in his field, things like that, which will amount to his quality of life. Look at that. But yeah, I think I always think the list way is a really good way of doing it, and also the calendar way. Do you think your horse is having a good day? And then look at, say, a month is always sort of a good time, a good period to look at. It's a good amount of time for you to assess what's actually going on. And if you're looking at that calendar and thinking it was a bit ropey on 20 out of 30 days, then he's probably not really got quality of life. That, you know, he's not going to look at the 5-10 days that he had good and think life's all hunky-dory. He's probably going to look at the 20 days that he was in pain. So
Yeah, no, I think that calendar method actually is a really good one, because I think you can sometimes as well sort of falsely remember things if you're trying to think back, and actually if you actually had it marked down, it might be a bit more realistic.
Well, you're always looking for like any little glimmer of hope, aren't you? You're always hanging on to, oh well, they had a good day yesterday, because you love them, and so you don't want to remember the bad things. But when it's there in black and white, I think that forces you into realizing what's actually going on.
I think that's a technique actually that we use as frontline welfare officers as well, because, you know, unfortunately, one of the common things that we deal with is delayed euthanasia of the older horse, and it's you know, we're quite often going out to see owners certainly people who weren't expecting welfare to, to arrive that day. And so they're often struggling with trying to recognise, well, why are welfare here and what is it that I haven't seen? And so we'll quite often do what we call looking back over the fence. So we'll look at, we'll get the phone out and we'll look at, I'll get them to show me pictures of what the horse used to look like, and then we can compare body condition, and it might be from a month ago, or it might be from 10 years ago, and then it's just more helpful for the people to sort of look at those physical aspects and go, well, yeah, actually a month ago he looked even better than he does now, and actually, yeah, I can see now that he has declined. Because when you're seeing it every day in front of you, it can be really difficult for people to identify things which, for me turning up, might look really, really obvious, but actually, as somebody seeing them every day, it can be really difficult to notify, to notice those kind of deteriorations.
No, and again, Penny, because most of us have phones that can take photos now anyway. So, and actually, that's a kind of really simple way, isn't it, of just almost every other day or whatever, snapping a quick photo, because it is very easy to put your rose tinted jet glasses on and and as you say, a lot of your role as field officer, you're almost going out and providing that objective assessment or helping owners work through that objective assessment, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think, from my point of view, unless it's a critical situation on that day, quite often what happens is I'll go out and we'll have this conversation, and we'll spend, for a fair amount of time looking back over photos, talking about the history of their horse and pony. I don't walk away and then they've made that decision suddenly there and then. But what often happens is a couple of days might go by, or a week goes by, and then they'll often get back in touch with us and go, do you know what? It was really helpful having that conversation, and I've actually made the decision that, I'm gonna have the horse or pony put to sleep. And sometimes it takes that conversation to happen for people to be able to make that really difficult decision.
No, yeah. And I think, as you say, sometimes getting that outside help is kind of what it takes to be able to really kind of see clearly what the real situation is. Yeah. We've got a question here from Facebook, and I think you covered it, Suzanne. So I'm just going back to you on it about, like, are you allowed to bury a horse on your own land?
Yes, basically, in a nutshell. In England, you can bury any horse. In Scotland and Wales, I think it's just companion horses you can bury. But like I say, they're meant to be, I can't actually remember the distance, but they're meant to be so far away from the watercourse so that you're not going to infest a watercourse with a dead body. But
do you need permission to do so, or is it, if it's on your own land, you're sort of giving yourself?
Not if it's on your land.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. There's a question here from Sue about, do the horses ever break bones when they land with like when they've been injected?
Well, probably nobody ever checks, do they? So certainly to my knowledge, I've not had one that has broken any bones when it's been injected and fallen over. But equally, unless you have a horse that's going for a post-mortem for any reason, we'd probably never actually know. But even if they did, they'd be unconscious before they broke the bone anyway, so I wouldn't even worry about it, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I think it is that kind of, as you say, that loss of consciousness, loss of feeling. So as they drop that, they can no longer feel anything. So it's So Penny, if a horse is shot and lies on its back paddling, does that mean that they are still conscious?
No, that's a reflex, basically. Again, having seen like a really large number of horses, put to sleep, both with injection and through having them shot, I've seen sort of, all ends of the scale. And I think it's absolutely right that we prepare people by saying, this could happen, that could happen, there might be some movement, there will be that drop to the floor. Equally, I've seen loads and loads of times where it's gone so smoothly and it's more of a sort of crumple to the floor, and maybe either none or minimal paddling. But I think it's right that we prepare people to say this can happen, because you wouldn't want to, find surprise by that. Not expecting it to happen. And so again, it's one of the conversations that I have with people when I go out, to say, I was asking them, have you ever had a horse put to sleep before? And it seems like such a simple question, doesn't it? But I'm still surprised when people say no, because then you go, okay, so have you got any experience of having a horse put to sleep? Because if you haven't, it's really important that you have that conversation, whether it's with me or your vet, so that you know what to expect. Because I can't imagine having a horse put to sleep with no knowledge of what's going to happen, because it wouldn't be a great thing to experience. So the more knowledge that you can get, the better prepared you're going to be.
Yeah, and I think it is, it's just the sheer size of the animal, isn't it, as well? And as you say, that these reflexes can be quite disturbing to witness, I think, firsthand. And often you can mistake it with the horse either, coming back round, trying to stand up, and it can be quite hard to eat, because I think once you've witnessed it firsthand, even though the animal is lost consciousness, or it's been shot, is actually dead, you can't. It's really difficult for your brain to not see that animal as being alive. Yeah,
that's where you have to put your trust in the professionals, because we're all telling you that the horse knows nothing about that, and that's just a reflex. And that's where you have to put your trust in the professionals and your trust in the science to go, we know that does not mean that your horse is alive. That's a reflex happening. But if you know it's going to happen, then you are prepared for it. That's the best way to be.
No, I'm going to ask you this question here from Janine as well. So it's, how much old age changes is acceptable to continue with if we can't cure? So I think the horse has got arthritis and is on bute, but it's not fully sound. It does lie down. It's 32 years old, so it has dental issues, and it has to be sedated. It has a dental twice a year. But worried about pain as it's not curing, so not getting any better. The diet is adapted to maintain the weight. Cushing's is reasonably maintained on Prasand. Has a set herd, so obviously in a herd, still the boss, still dominant in his herd. It grazes. It's doing most things it used to enjoy, but at a grandma level, so just at a slower level. Does this all sound like, so what would your kind of comments be on what Janine's saying about her horse?
The way that I look at this, and it's not so much how do I make that decision or what is okay. I look at it and say, am I prepared, or how prepared am I to watch my horse deteriorate? This horse that I absolutely love, that I'm committed to, that I've devoted my life to. How prepared am I to watch that horse deteriorate? And there has to be a cut-off point at that, and there is for me. And I knew with my old horse, he'd had a reoccurring leg problem. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was, he was a 28-year-old thoroughbred. He was already on bute to be field sound, which he was. But the 1 year, I'd said to myself, if that condition comes back again next year, I'm going to call it a day, because he hated me having to treat it. And as hard as it was, I kept my word. And this sounds a bit odd, but there might be somebody out there that can relate. I was really proud when I had him put to sleep, because to me, he didn't look much difference in terms of his body condition to the day that I got him when he was 12, and he was 28, and he was a thoroughbred. So to me, I felt really proud that he looked amazing, because I wasn't prepared to watch him deteriorate. So I think you have to look at, we have to look at our own horses and ponies and go, this isn't it's not something that I feel really quite strongly that it's not something that we should put on our vets. They give us the guidance, they give us support, they can give us the science-based facts, and yes, they can give us the advice. But actually, certainly when it comes to older horses, and they have inevitably a number of conditions, I think that decision has to lie with us. And I have, in my own mind, I have levels of what I'm willing to deteriorate, what I'm willing to not watch deteriorate. And that's where my mind is. And I think it's difficult for everyone in their own individual way. So rather than saying, when is the right time to make that decision, I sort of switch it around and go, well, what am I not willing to do? Well, I'm not willing to watch my horse deteriorate to the point where its life is no longer a good quality of life.
No, thank you for that, Penny. And I think it's almost kind of quite I don't know, liberating, but it's very to hear you say how you're proud to have had your horse put to sleep, and all the reasons why. And I think I think we need to hear more stories like this as well, because I think quite often when we decide to have our horse put to sleep, maybe as a preemptive sort of, as kind of as you've done, you're not prepared to go down that route. It can also be quite tinged with guilt, like did I give up too soon? Should I have tried something else? But actually being able to, as you have done, actually really turn it into all the positives of actually why that was 100% the right decision. And there's not, I'm not saying that you don't have maybe the odd twinge of guilt every now and then, but it actually sounds like it is, as I say, a very positive experience.
I probably did at the beginning, but I think, and then, I wasn't working in welfare at that point. But I would say one of the things that I get asked the most now is, well, how do you know when is the right time? And there's that phrase, isn't there, of, always always better a day too early than a day too late. And I can't tell you how true that is, because I have come across people where it's gone the other way, and they've come back to me and said, I didn't listen, I didn't do it at the right time. And I would say to people, trust me when I say there's nothing worse than potentially having to see your horse down and not able to get up. The horse won't know that you're doing it a week earlier than you planned or a month earlier than planned. They don't have those same mind thoughts the same way that we do. But the last thing that you'll want to do as an owner is have a horse on the floor that can't get up.
Yeah, no, and I think, yeah, as I say, from even an owner's point of view, you don't want to put yourself through that as well, let alone your horse. Suzanne, we have, I'm going to ask you a few questions. So is shooting quicker than injection?
Yeah, shooting is pretty sudden. The minute I pull that trigger, like I said, that horse is in front of me on the floor. So yeah, it's really sudden, which is why I think a lot of owners can't actually deal with it.
Yeah, no, as you say, it is, and it's sort of that and obviously the immediate response from the animal as well. Michelle asks, what paperwork is needed before the horse is put to sleep?
Your vet will quite often get you to sign a euthanasia consent form on your horse. But apart from that, sorry, just muted you. But yeah, apart from that, we don't really need any paperwork. The only thing we'll get you to sign is a consent form.
Okay, and will that be the same for a necroman or a collector? Will they get you to sign something beforehand?
Quite often they won't, but equally they might do, but quite often they won't.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we have one here from a question from Hannah. So during dental treatments, that's sort of my question, so just go on. During dental treatments, my horse always needs more sedation than vets expect for his size. Could this indicate that he would also need a higher dose of the euthanasia injection once the time comes? Obviously this will be assessed by the vet who does it, but is this something that should be kept in mind?
No, two different things. No.
So different types of drugs that operate differently.
No.
Okay,
he will be given the Somnolose drug, which is used to euthanize him by body weight, and that will be fine. He won't need a higher dose than that at all.
Okay, thank you. Penny, we got a question here from Violet. It says, my 29-year-old doesn't lie down in her stable at all now. She can get down and up again as she rolls in the field. She sleep crashes in her stable, hasn't yet injured herself. What's your feelings on this?
I think it's probably a more important question to say what's her feelings on this, because I can give my opinion on it, but I think the person that matters most about is the owner, because the owner is the one that knows that horse and will know what was normal a month ago, what was normal 2 months ago. And so it goes back to that list, doesn't it, that Suzanne talked about, of going, is how long, over what period has this developed. And yeah, I mean, you do have to then look at what's the quality of life and what changes have happened to that quality of life, and is that something that's fair to continue. But I think it's really important that every horse or pony is assessed on its own individual quality of life and its own individual personality, and the person that knows them best is going to be the owner.
Yeah, and I think and again, I think is just to kind of repeat a lot of what Suzanne has said before as on our presentation, but like euthanasia should never be seen as a failure either, like a failed option or anything, or as like a last resort. It is a sort of a viable option up there with.
I think we do talk about the horses and ponies lying down and getting up as a real sort of marker as to what their quality of life is. With an older horse, I assume that's what this horse or pony is. And so for me, it is quite a big marker. Is it, did it lie down in its stable before? Is that what's changed now, and it's not doing that now? And if you can stand there and watch and see how it's changed and how it's getting up and down, because if it's really struggling, then that's something you need to, if you haven't already, speak to your vet about and have that conversation. Is there a different road to go down, or is this the right route for this pony at this time? Because that is a change in its quality of life.
No, I think, yeah, just as you say, talking about quality of life again, just being able to objectively assess that. So the question from Anna, this is for both of you, like, so personally and professionally, do you both have a preference for the method of euthanasia undertaken, i.e. drug versus injection, and why? So you can go first, Penny, if you want.
Actually, it's quite an interesting one because many years ago, I gave a presentation on euthanasia, and it was actually about the method of euthanasia that I had for my own horse. And I had him, this particular horse, the Irish Thoroughbred, I had him injected. And don't get me wrong, there was absolutely nothing wrong with having a horse injected. However, I then spent many, many years as a frontline welfare officer, and then began to see, you know, the animals which were shot. And for me, that changed my perspective, and the equines that I've had since then put to sleep have been through free bullet. You know, I personally like the idea that they put the head in the bucket and they've taken a mouthful and they've gone. But as Suzanne said, you know, there's a lot of people that find the whole suddenness of that difficult, and also because, you know, there's no moving away from the fact that there's blood involved, and that's, you know, it's never a nice thing. But you know, I think knacker men get a bit of a rough deal, don't they? It's unfortunate that they're called knacker men, because I think that very phrase gives them a bit of a rough ride. But when you've got a really good relationship with your knacker men, which I have through work, you know, they're doing an amazing job and they're really, really efficient at it. And for me, it was just a change in personal preference.
Suzanne, do you have a preference?
Do I? Probably. I've actually done my horses both ways. I've had 2 go by injection and 1 go by bullet, but the one that went by bullet was because he was that bad to inject that it was going to be a lot more stress trying to inject him, and he was a big 17-2 hunter. So it was going to be a lot more stress for him, so he got done by bullet, and it was all absolutely fine. If I had a choice, I'd probably inject them, because like I said, I quite often, once I've put them to sleep, I quite often stand there and think, do you know what, that was, like I say, it was just a really nice way to go. And I often think, I hope I get to go like that. You know, it's just peaceful and nice, and you stood there eating your carrots one minute, you sedated the next, you're dead the next, and you've not really known anything about it. So I actually think the injection's a really nice way to go. Work-wise, I shoot quite a lot now, but I do quite a lot of welfare work. Well, a lot of welfare work. And so quite often we get things that are obviously terrified of humans, or, you know, little wriggly things that, you know, you don't want to be sticking your head near to injecting things. So again, I'll do them both ways professionally.
I think sometimes you have to give consideration to the environment as well, don't you? Because just last week I had a horse that was in a field on its own that was being put to sleep. Now, in theory, there was no reason why it couldn't have been shot. However, it was right next door to a livery yard, and all the horses were out in the field. And I'm not going to want to put those horses through that, because they were so very close and the horse couldn't be moved. So there's different environmental reasons why you might not shoot a horse as well.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really important for anyone like considering what they might want to use for their horse to speak to other people about, you know, and their friends and stuff about what their experience has been and stuff. And I know that definitely helped me. And I know this might sound like, I don't know, a bit weird, but one of the things I kind of wish I had really understood when I had my own horse shot was actually, as you say, the amount of blood that was involved, and I might have just positioned him in a slightly different, more accessible place, so I could have cleaned it up a bit easier with the hose afterwards, because it then meant for the next 6 months I had to walk past where there had been obviously a lot of blood, and although I cleaned it up as best as I could, there was this sort of marker of where his last moments had been. And as I say, like, it just always struck me that in future, or if I'm ever now speaking to anyone about sort of euthanasia, it's a really small thing, but just consider how you can clean up that area afterwards if you do decide to have the horse shot, because as we've heard tonight, there is a lot of blood.
Yeah. And I think that's also actually something important to mention, that if you do have the euthanasia done by knacker men, quite often what will happen is when they've shot the horse, they will very quickly put a bag over the horse's head. But inevitably they won't catch, you know, every drop of blood. But equally, if you don't know that a bag might come out, you know, that might be something that you might be shocked to see. So just bear that in mind as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. We are coming up towards the end, so I'm just going to, I don't want to obviously whiz through any of these questions because these are all, as I say, really important questions that are coming up. So we'll maybe try and get through another couple, and then we will, I'll ask for some final thoughts. But we've got a question here from Facebook about what can I do if my vet doesn't support my decision to put my horse to sleep? And I'll obviously aim that one at you, Suzanne, being the vet.
Well, there isn't actually a reason why your vet shouldn't support you wanting your horse put to sleep. Maybe get a different vet, because I don't actually think that is an appropriate way for your vet to behave, to be honest. They should be there to support you. If you brought me a horse that you just wanted putting to sleep, then I would rather put that horse to sleep than see it end up somewhere where it was going to get mistreated. So for me, even if your horse didn't have any conditions but you simply didn't want it, at least its welfare is ensured that way, then your vet should support your decision, really. Like, granted, they don't have to do anything, but for me, your vet should support your decision, particularly if it's got problems.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, and I think, as you say, that there's euthanasia is, as you've mentioned quite a few times, always sort of an option. Sort of regardless of what the situation is. And I think we'll do this final question, and you're both obviously very active in the whole equine welfare world. So do you find that there's a different attitude towards euthanasia between different owner types, such as business owners or leisure owners? And if so, why do you think these differences might be? Suzanne, do you ever notice between,
yeah, absolutely. You get the people that have had one pony for 27 years and love it to death, and it's the whole life, and they're really emotionally bonded to it. And and those are, for me, at the euthanasias that I find the hardest, because you've probably worked with those owners for the 12 years that I've been a vet, and you know how much it means to them, and they're going to be a blubbering mess, and you actually have to stand there and bite your lip yourself, because it's not the horse that you're sad for, because you put that to sleep for a reason. It's the people that are really absolutely broken by it. So you get those people at one end of the spectrum, and then you get the people that, I don't know, have a lot of horses, no real emotional attachment to them, breed, break, work them, whatever. The horses have, they've got a job to do, but they don't actually get many emotional ties to them. And they're obviously quite matter of fact about it, and quite often just want it put into sleep the cheapest way they can. But that's fine. There's no right or wrong. You can't say that anybody should have a emotional tie to their horse and what happens to it. And equally, I've had horses myself where they've been my absolute pride and joy, and then I've had other horses where I've never really bonded to, and it's just different, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So there's no right or wrong to it. But yeah, there is certainly differences.
And Penny, have you found that in your work? Have you seen any main differences?
I think obviously you have to remember, with the work that I do, I'm visiting people who are not expecting me to turn up, and then with the work that I do, it's not, we don't go to one job and then resolve the issue and it's one visit. I will spend quite often a large amount of time building relationships with people, and so they might be people who haven't had a vet to their horse. There might be people who can't see that there's a problem with their horse. So I'm seeing a very different selection of people with their horses. What I will say is that, by and large, with the horses that I visit, when we talk about the elderly aspect and the delayed euthanasia side, they are some of the best well looked after horses that I will ever come across. And the reason that they may have come to the attention of a welfare organisation is not because the owners are being vile to them, or cruel or neglectful, but it's because they're struggling to say goodbye. And that's the part where, we will often be called to get involved, because they're struggling so much that perhaps even when other people have tried to intervene, they haven't been able to sort of quite get to that point. So yeah, I see a very different sort of clientele list, if you like. So it's hard to sort of say that there's one type of person that I see or not, but I would say that, yeah, they're often the most well looked after horses and ponies from that point of view.
No, thank you very much for that, Penny. We are at the end of our webinar, so I'm going to, sorry for everyone's question we've not managed to answer. We are running slightly out of time. So in saying that, Suzanne, would you be able to give us a real quick take home final thought message, please, on everything we've been discussing tonight?
For me, like I said pretty much in my talk, just remember that euthanasia is a good welfare and treatment option. So that's my main take-home message, along with that horses don't have any perception of time. So if you are struggling with a young horse, don't think that you've got to drag them through 30 years of poor welfare just to say that you've got it to 30. If those 30 years are going to be miserable.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for that, Suzanne. Really appreciate it. And Penny, do you have any final thoughts?
I think mine would be make that plan and make the right people aware of what that plan is. If it's a livery yard owner, if it's the vet, make that plan, because there's nothing worse than you not being there and what your wishes might have been, not being followed because no one was aware of them. World Horse Welfare have a document called Just in Case, which I think Basil's put the link up on, and it's a physical document that you can use. You can give it to a yard owner or a vet, and it can actually detail what your wishes are, and then that way, they're going to be, followed.
No, thank you very much. And as you say, that is a great document to have to hand. So I will just do one big thank you again to Penny and Suzanne for taking time out to speak to us on this, as I say, really important and very emotive topic. So you guys have done a great job, and I can just see hundreds, tens of messages coming through to all thanking you both for everything that you shared with us today. So lots of very positive messages. So thank you for everyone who's submitted a question or a comment. It helps the webinars. And just to remind people that if you have any ideas for future webinars, then the email is education@worldhorsewelfare.org. And our next webinar is in 3 weeks' time. So that's the 4th of May during Strangles Awareness Week. And that is Strangles, how to confidently reduce the risk of this preventable disease. So see everybody hopefully in 3 weeks' time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.